Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and today we're going to be taking a look at a brand new product coming to us from the JW Rutledge Distillery. This is their High Plains Rye Whiskey. All right, so many of you probably know the name Jim Rutledge as a very famous person in the whiskey industry, especially because of his time as master distiller at Four Roses. Now, Jim actually retired from that position in September of 2015, but it didn't take long for him to announce the start of a new project, his very own JW Rutledge Distillery. In the meantime, as we wait on that distillery to be completed, Jim is keeping busy with a number of notable side projects that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The most recent of those is probably his involvement at Blue Run, where he is considered their liquid advisor, or basically just the mastermind behind the barrel selections, the blending of their small batch products, and the bottling of some cask strength single barrels. Now, Jim also recently brought to the market, or I guess I should say revived, a previously defunct brand called Cream of Kentucky. I'm sure at this point many of you have heard of Cream of Kentucky and seen those bottles in your areas. But basically what's going on here is that Jim has sourced some older barrels, presumably from 1792/Barton, and blended those together for some premium products. These are age stated between, I believe, 11 and a half and 13 years old. But again, this is a way to get a brand under the JW Rutledge umbrella before the distillery is completed. Now, along those same lines of sourcing and blending and releasing some things pre-distillery construction, we are now looking at this High Plains Rye Whiskey as sort of the next bottle to come from JW Rutledge. So let's talk about this thing now. First, we'll kind of go over the stats of this bottle. I'll give you just a brief update on sort of distribution and stuff like that, and then we'll get right to the nosing, tasting, and review here. I was able to acquire this about a month before it's hitting shelves across the country, which is like basically right now, the end of July 2021. At the beginning of the month, I was able to connect with some of the JW Rutledge guys. It was a really cool experience. I'm not going to go into it here. I'm actually going to post sort of an, appendix or extra video after the fact. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be a day or two after I release this video, and I'll kind of tell the story there, but I don't want to bore you with it here. So let's get right to this bottle here. As you can see, this is a pretty simplistic bottle design here. Sort of a shorter, squattier bottle. We've got a black label on the front, some holographic amber writing, and then here we have sort of a little logo for JW Rutledge. If you turn the bottle around and take a look at the back label, we get a ton of valuable information here about the sourcing of the different rye whiskeys that have been blended in here. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, let me mention the proof. This is clocking in at 97 proof, or 48.5% ABV. So this is a great sippable proof. Sippable, that's a hard word. It's a great sippable proof. It is not barrel strength or anything like that, so just adjust your expectations on the palate and on the finish, since we are dealing with a 97 proofer. I'm going to tell you why I love this back label, all right? So most distilleries will give you sort of information about the sourcing relative to the state that they are sourcing from. So you'll see, distilled in Indiana or distilled in Kentucky or Tennessee, wherever. But oftentimes we don't get told the exact distillery that the stuff is coming from. In this case, for the High Plains Rye, we're actually told every distillery that they've sourced from here. It is completely the most transparent label I think I've ever seen. So let me read it to you here. The whiskeys selected for this rendering were distilled by Kentucky Artisan Distillery, Middle West Distillery right here in Ohio, MGP Distillery in Indiana, and New York Distilling Company, yielding a rye whiskey to be enjoyed by all. The last thing I'll say, which one of the guys at JW Rutledge told me, sort of a cool way to remember the contents of this bottle. There are 5 rye whiskeys from 4 distilleries, blended by 3 people to create 1 unique rye whiskey. Now, I know 2 is a little weak in that sequence of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but I like that as a way to kind of remember what is going on here. I can't remember if I've mentioned this already, but it's going to be distributed in about 24 markets in the US for this inaugural release. And this first release is going to be 4,050 cases. All right, these are 6-pack cases, a little over 24,000 bottles. I'll put all the markets in the description below of this video so you can see exactly where the distribution is. Sadly, in Ohio, we are not going to see High Plains Rye, but I'm glad, again, that I have this bottle. So let's get to this now. I don't think there's anything else to talk about. So we're going to nose, taste, evaluate, check this thing out. High Plains Rye Whiskey, everybody. All right, first impressions here on the nose. This is a very sort of craft grain forward whiskey. What I mean by that is, for those of you who have tried whiskeys from younger or smaller distilleries, usually ones that are using a pot still, you tend to get a little extra grain flavor, a little more richness in the grain characteristic, and you're really tending to get that here. That is not an aroma or flavor for everybody, and I should just say that right now. For me, it took a while to kind of get into some of those craft grain characteristics in some of these different whiskeys. But nowadays, I really love when you can get the quality of the grains here on the nose. Yeah, and sort of the other overarching quality of this whiskey here, before I kind of get more detailed about it, is just that this is a great combination of light and dark rye notes, okay? So on the lighter end of the spectrum with a rye whiskey, you might expect some herbaceous floral qualities. You don't get a ton of that here. Really what I get here is a little bit of lemon citrus, a nice dose of cinnamon, a little bit of white pepper here on the nose, but that's really it for sort of the more traditional, brighter rye notes. You don't get a lot of that herbaceousness here. And then on the other side of things, which I think is a little bit more of the sort of body of this whiskey, are these darker flavors, or darker aromas, I should say, here on the nose. You get a lot of like chocolate, almost like a malted milk ball. Yeah, a little bit of black tea, which is kind of an interesting note for a rye whiskey. I like it in this case. Yeah, and just a nice overall kind of malty, syrupy, rich profile here. But I've got to say, this chocolate or malted milk ball note is really standing out to me. So again, overall on the nose, nice craft grain quality. You can really pick out the grains here, and then it edges more towards this darker end of the flavor spectrum, but it does retain a couple of the lighter rye forward characteristics on the nose. So I think that's about as much detail as we need. Let's go ahead and go to the palate now. Cheers. All right, on the palate here, first sip, let's talk about the mouthfeel, just sort of the overall experience of that. It's got a really solid mouthfeel at 97 proof. Remember, this is not a barrel proofer, so some people might say, oh, it's not oily enough, it's not viscous enough. I don't think that's true. I think for a 97 proofer, you guys hear the thunder, it's storming here. For a 97 proofer, this is entirely appropriate. You get a nice little bit of cinnamon and that like sort of white pepper pop up front, and then it rolls back and you start to get into a lot of those darker characteristics. But yeah, overall, the palate experience here on the first sip is really, really nice. Let's go in for a second sip now, kind of drill down on this. All right, yeah, like I said, you get that cinnamon up front, you get that white pepper up front, you also get the citrus, sort of that lemon zest note. All of the lighter characteristics, basically, of this whiskey are what kind of take off right off the bat. As it starts to roll back, that's when you get into some more of the interesting qualities of this. Not that the front of the palate's not interesting, but it's like, hey, I'm a rye whiskey. What's up? You know, we're here to have a good time. As it rolls back, starts to kind of smooth out. It gets a little more sweet, a little more velvety. You get that chocolate note that I talked about, that malted milk ball or whatever. You get all of the malty characteristics here, that sweetness. I really love the way that this thing transitions from spice into sweet. And now as we get into the finish, it continues getting a little darker. The finish right now, in sort of the throat area, it kind of stops here before it gets to the chest, and it's a really nice sort of cinnamon pepper burn. In the palate here, it turns slightly bitter. You get a little barrel char that goes along with those sweet chocolate notes. So a little bittersweet action in the palate. Overall, a very balanced finish. And again, for a 97 proofer and a rye whiskey, a young craft blend of rye whiskeys, it is very appropriate and very enjoyable. So let's do one last sip here. I know I nerded out there for a second. We'll do one last sip here, kind of give a couple final thoughts, and then wrap this thing up. You know what this thing reminds me of? Here on the third sip, it starts to get a little sweeter. It almost reminds me of like a Mexican chocolate, if you guys have ever had that. Or even if you're a beer drinker, if you like really heavy stouts, some of those stouts that have like chili pepper in them or something like that, like a spicy component. You get this sort of chocolate, but the cinnamon plays nicely with it. And those Mexican chocolates I'm talking about tend to have like some sort of spice component added to them. So it's kind of reminding me of that here. Yeah, overall, really enjoyable rye whiskey here. I think what JW Rutledge has done with this blend is phenomenal, considering the fact that they've taken so many different rye whiskeys from all over the place and blended them together. I really enjoy it. I like the fact that it's going to appeal to a rye drinker because it has the cinnamon, the slight citrus, the peppery quality, and a hint of a floral component. But it's also going to appeal to a bourbon drinker for the darker, richer part of the profile. And I actually think this could appeal to a Scotch fan as well, because it has this malty characteristic that almost drinks like a Scotch in the mid palate. Overall, I would say this is a fantastic do-it-all sort of everyday rye whiskey. It might not be your special occasion pour, but if you can grab a couple of bottles of this and make this sort of an everyday sipper, I think it's a fantastic choice for that. And I've got to say, I'm really, really enjoying it. I think that's all I need to say about this whiskey. Price-wise here, this is coming in at about $50 or $55 MSRP. If you do see it in your area, remember, limited distribution, about 24 markets for this first release. At that $50 to $55 mark, I think it's a great buy. I wouldn't pay over it. I don't know if these are going to see a secondary type price or not. I would not go any higher than that. But considering what you're getting here, the fact that it differentiates itself from the market while also being sort of a catch-all option for a lot of different whiskey lovers, I think it's a great buy at $50 or $55. And finally, this is batch 1. It does not carry a batch number on the label. However, I was told that future releases should be carrying batch numbers on those labels. So it's going to turn into something that I'm sure people are going to want to collect. And I'll be curious to see how these things continue to evolve. But I think that's all I've got for this video. Remember, I will be putting out a little extra episode to talk about my time with the guys at JW Rutledge. Really, really cool trip to hang out and taste through the different blends that ended up creating this rye whiskey here. So look out for that video. Otherwise, please hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, click the little bell notification button, and turn on all notifications so you can find out when I'm going live and when I'm dropping new content. If you want to help support the channel and get access to behind-the-scenes content, you can check out the Drums and Drams Patreon page. The link is in the description below. Let me know when these pop up in your area. And if you pick one up, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this. I feel like it's a very interesting, unique rye whiskey. I tend to really like it. It's grown on me so much from when I first opened it. The cinnamon component has definitely come out with some air in the bottle, the black tea component as well. But overall, I think it just covers so many bases, and I think it's another great blend from Jim Rutledge. That's all I've got. Thank you guys. Cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.